condition is beyond recognition, and the strangest things will happen the second you go.
Welcome to Recovery Soapbox, sponsored by Brighton Recovery Center. Thinking about this podcast on the way over here, I haven't done one in a very long time, and when I think about the idea of it, our guest is really what the idea was about. It's Heather Coates. She is what is your title over here?
Community Operations Director.
So she's what this podcast was about. So when Neil and I talked about this years ago, I think we first did Recovery Soapbox 5 years ago. The idea was to just, remove the stigma and share stories. But I've said this to a lot of people, but honestly, I've done a lot for Brighton. I've dedicated my life for many years to it, and I've had a lot of rewarding things, but the best thing I ever did for Brighton was to hire you. And your story is compelling, it's moving, it's inspiring. We all have different bottoms, and it's not a contest to that bottom, but yours is epic in its darkness. It is, and not that it's, that's not the goal, right? When we're out using it, it's like, oh, fuck, let's see how dark we can get. But really, it's like when you're in it, it becomes that. And I'm inspired by who you are. I'm inspired by what you do, and we're fortunate to have you here. And I'm glad that you're a guest. Very fortunate. So tell me a little bit though, where were you raised, originally?
So I grew up in a small farm town northwest of Ogden. So it's called Plain City. It's people are more familiar with Willard Bay or Smith & Edwards Country Boy Store.
Smith & Edwards pickup truck.
Smith & Edwards surplus bus. Yeah, so that's Plain City. And it was I don't know, population when I was growing up was really, really small. But yeah, so that's where I'm originally from.
When did you not to sound like a clinical screening, but when was the first time you really started dabbling and experimenting with drugs and alcohol?
So probably sophomore year in high school. Dramamine, I think, was the first.
Dramamine.
I took an entire box of Dramamine and I was hallucinating.
Isn't that weird? Do you remember No-Dos?
Oh yeah.
Kate, we would smoke pot when I was 16, and then we would eat a ton of No-Dos and get so sick. And it's just if you have to be a certain age to remember No-Dos.
Yeah, you do. And No-Dos, it's so you don't fall asleep, so you get the idea. It's a stimulant.
And then how old were you when you got married? I'm fast forwarding.
2020.
2020?
I was 20. I was thinking 21, but I was 21 when I had my first child, but I was 20 when I got married.
And then how long were you married?
7 years.
The reason why I say this is Heather's story. It's unique in the progression of the way it happened. A lot of people, spoiler alert, she ended up homeless. A lot of people's progression early on, it is a progression that leads to homelessness earlier, it seems like. Or maybe there's a story. I'm probably stereotyping. I'm sure there's all kinds of homeless. You would know better than I.
I think so I remember, so I didn't get in trouble with the law until I was 36 years old. So yeah, and I had a probation officer, and I said, he's going through my history, and he's like, what in the world? How is this? What's going on here? And I was like, well, I'm just a late bloomer. And he said, no, you're never should have been a bloomer. How did this happen? So I really did.
And what was the first charge at 36?
Well, I had a previous DUI, but it was dropped because I was had a very low blood alcohol, and I'd never been in trouble. So the next, why I was on probation with that guy was forgery, fraud, possession
of
methamphetamine and heroin, paraphernalia, of course, that always goes with it. And that wasn't my first. That was just why I had ended up in this guy's care, because I had been on APMP a bunch of times in that, from 35 to 30. I started at 35. But this was, I was 36 when I'm talking to this guy. And I had been on probation multiple times, and I would just abscond. So this was my last chance when I was finally. So no, when I talked to him, I was 40. Never mind.
40.
I was 40. Yeah. So, but he looked at my history and he's like, what happened? He's like, so at 35, what happened? What the hell made you want to blow your life up?
And so what the hell did happen? Because you were married, how many kids?
So I was married, my first marriage was 7 years. My second marriage, I was with him for 13 years.
Okay, and so, and you're drinking the whole time during that marriage?
No, so my first marriage, he's an alcoholic still to this day. He probably will die that way. He's jaundiced, he's, very sick.
Jaundiced Juleberger.
Yeah, he's a little cirrhotic.
Neurotic, cirrhotic, jaundice.
But yeah, so he was an alcoholic, and his everything became very dysfunctional with him, where I had to work multiple jobs to try to support because he couldn't work because he was, he had some mental health stuff that he doesn't want, that he doesn't believe in, like, I keep touching this mic. He doesn't want to believe in, he doesn't believe in like mental health care. He doesn't think it's like, so anyway, so I was dealing with that, and I had Daphne, my daughter. She was, I had her when I was 21, and then Owen, I had him 4 years later. And so I didn't really, in the beginning, didn't drink with him. I was resentful of his drinking, and I was just always working just to keep. So
were you, at that time, would you consider yourself like you were holding it down as a mom, or did you struggle?
No.
Like you were doing well, like you took care of the home.
Going to Little League.
And how old are your kids?
How old are they now?
No, then.
Oh, so when it was really getting bad, like Daphne was probably, when I divorced him, Daphne was, 7 years old, because I was like pregnant with Daphne when I got married, right? I had her like a few months later. And so she was like about 7, and then Owen was 4, or 3, he was 3. And so I was holding it down, and then I started drinking.
And how old's that?
How old was I?
When you started like getting and drinking heavy as a mom?
28, 29.
Okay.
So I started drinking at night, like when I get home from work, but it was like I couldn't wait till 5, just to like get that escape and that like relief. And then when I finally, I was just like, I can't do this anymore. And I left Jason, my first husband. Like a year later, I met my second husband, who was also an alcoholic, but he made it look more glamorous or whatever, because he had money and he could. So it was like mimosas for breakfast, Bloody Marys. Like, it's okay because it's fancy, and and he had a lot of money, and he had a nice house, and he was like functional, like he could keep shit. Well, there is a difference together.
I mean, there's high functioning and alcoholics but the money does kind of.
Yeah. Well, and I was still not like what I would consider like. Because I would go days without drinking, right? And I would, or if I had to like work, or I still had some like level of. And I remember like the first time I was at Troy, was my second husband. I was at his house, and I heard him crack a beer at like 9 o'clock in the morning, like on a Saturday morning, and I was like, "Well, he just crack a beer? Like, we're not camping. What the hell?" Like, I was freaked out by that, and I was just like, "Did you just?" And he's like, "Yeah, why not? It's Saturday." And I was like, "Whoa."
And that's what's so amazing about your progression, is because like you were this in your late 20s, 30s. Mm-hmm. You're literally shocked at the cracking of a beer at 9 a.m. on a Saturday.
Mm-hmm. I was freaked out. I was like, what?
That is such a rapid, wild progression.
Mm-hmm. So I was like 29 when I first started dating Troy. So at 29, I was like, whoa, like you're drinking in the morning.
And how many years of drinking, like you're functioning as a mom, but you're excited to drink in the evenings. How many years until that was a noticeable problem? So
when I started hanging out with Troy, and then I kind of like started normalizing like drinking earlier, within 2 years of hanging out with him, I was physically dependent on alcohol.
And that's in your probably like 33?
31 is when I went to treatment the first time. So it like took
So you went to treatment at 31?
Yeah.
Okay.
For alcohol. And but at that time, like I was like, I had a nice house, like I looked good, my kid, everything's looking, so I didn't think I was an alcoholic because I'm with these people who are in trouble with the law, they have lost their children.
So what was your mindset going into treatment that first time?
Well, I physically had to drink in order to just, I mean? I was like doing this at the liquor store with change, It was like, I knew it was bad. And I had left Troy at this point. Troy was in jail. So we weren't together, and I was living with my parents who are Mormon, and I was like drinking in their basement, and like the mattress was just bottles and bottles and bottles. You know what I mean? I called it the boneyard because I didn't want to throw it in the trash.
Where are your kids at that
They're
time?
in Delta. That's where, so we lived in Delta, my first husband and I, he's from there. And when I left, I can't stay in Delta because I don't have family there. I don't have any, so I had to move this way, and my kids came with me. And, this is like a long story, but it's like and Jason was fine with it because he knew why I was leaving. And so I had to move with my mom. And at the time, my mom had like my younger siblings were still at home. So like we didn't even have a room to stay in. It was just me, Daphne, and Owen like on the floor. And I got a job, and and they're having to go to daycare, and it was just like, finally Jason, who we stayed friends. Like we didn't have we kind of like mediated out of court. It was really chill. He just said, I think it'd be better for the kids to come like to their house where they have their dogs and their grandma and their friends, and you know what I mean, until you get a place and have some stability. So that's what I did. But when I started dating again, he in some part of his mind thought we were gonna get back together. So the first husband. Yeah. So he filed for divorce, and in the affidavit, he said all this stuff that wasn't true. This is real. Like I was like, what? But in the state of Utah, the person who what's the word? Like instigates right, gets like has the rights, right? So he made it look like I abandoned them, which wasn't true.
Do you feel so? You didn't abandon them. You were were you
heavy
in alcohol?
But because I was not able to cope with life in like a normal way, that triggered like a kind of well then fuck it. It really did.
Well, that was your excuse as an addict,
exactly.
for sure.
And so then that's when I really took it to the next level, and that's when my drinking really took off, because I no longer had, I still got the kids on the weekends and stuff, but it was just like, I'm no longer, like I don't have this purpose anymore, and it was just, and I didn't know it was untreated alcoholism. I didn't know what I was dealing with, right? I just thought, like, how could this happen? Like I didn't abandon them, and he knows that. And he later admitted to me that he didn't write that affidavit. His mother did. He just signed it. So he didn't even know what it said. It was like said all these terrible things that weren't true. So anyway, so that kind of was like, yeah, exactly. That was like the catalyst for me to be like, well.
Treatment at 31, second marriage, essentially functioning housewife, but drinking problem. And then that escalates. It's just so unusual. And I think the story's the same. It doesn't matter if you were in your teens or your 20s. But at what age were you first introduced to heroin? So
I had my second husband and we both got sober, and we were like 3.5 years sober. Had a child in that period, got married and whatever. And we weren't in recovery. We were just sober, and we decided we could drink again because in my mind, 3.5 years, I'm cured of alcoholism.
And there's the hook.
Right.
But we decided we could drink again.
Yeah. And
it would be okay.
Yeah, because I really thought that like it was just a matter of like distance.
If you're in early recovery, seriously, that is, to me, if there's anything you can learn, it's that right there. Mm-hmm. Seriously, if you're watching this in early recovery, we thought we could drink again.
I just got goosebumps.
No, me too. No, really, that is,
because it's so true. That was the trap.
In admissions, we hear it all the time because some people think, oh, my problem was heroin and I can have a drink.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just not worth it. So anyway.
So after 3.5 years. How did
that work out for you? Drinking?
So I'll let you know really quick. So I made that decision. I was at a bar. I'll just explain how I got introduced to heroin, because that's wild. Heroin was something I didn't even know what it looked like. I didn't know anybody that used heroin. It was not a part of my social circle. 35.
35 years old and never done heroin.
And I'm at this bar that we used to frequent where people would do like lines of cocaine in the back, right? Which I'd done that before. Yeah. So someone was like, let's go do a line, whatever. This was after I decided that drinking was okay again.
Yeah.
I go into the back room, and this bar, by the way, is a place where people go to die. Like, not a nice bar, really a horrible.
It's a die bar, not a dive bar.
Dive bar.
It's a die bar.
Horrible.
It's like some people go to dive
like,
and they think it's cool. This horrible. Is a die bar.
Like, you can't believe.
Go to the dive. No, it's die.
Yeah, dive bar. You cannot believe. So really terrible. So anyway, I go in the back room, and there's this girl, and she's like, hey, and this girl, by the way, has now like 6 years sober. But she was just this junkie that would hang out at this bar, and she's in the back room. She's like, "Hey, you want to try heroin?" And I was like,
substance use dependent.
And I was like, heroin. I was like, I've seen Basketball Diaries and Train Spotting. Like heroin.
That's right.
That's not a party drug. Like, what are you saying? Like cocaine once in a while, fine, but heroin.
Did Nikki Sixx have a real problem with that?
I'm like, yeah, I've seen what I do. But then she talked me into it. She said, "You've taken a Percocet and drank a beer before." And I was like, "Oh yeah, I do like that." My God. And so she was like, she's like, you just. And then when I found out you could smoke it, it didn't have, because I always thought it had to be with needles.
It was tar heroin.
So we smoked it.
Tinfoil.
So I smoked it, and
so
I
you're
was
at
like,
the die bar on tar heroin with tinfoil, chasing the dragon.
I smoked it. So, but I didn't become addicted immediately. But within a very short time.
Do you remember that first hit? Like, how was it?
And I was like, this is awesome. Yeah, and I bought some right then to take home with me. So. And I had, by the way, I had a home in Farmington on 2 acres with like chickens and like a garden and like, I mean, I had a very normal.
And some heroin to go from the dive bar.
And just like a little heroin to have at night, like in the shed, you know, just for fun.
Just a little heroin.
And I wasn't physically dependent on heroin for a long time. Alcohol was my problem. And I got
so you go
DCFS involvement.
You smoke some heroin, some on your own.
It was in the shed outside.
Okay.
I never knew about it at my house. And it would just be like a little tiny bit. It was actually alcohol that was like, I had a situation, I got DCFS involvement with that child because of my drinking and, well, I don't know if this is like too much, but.
There's no such thing.
I was drinking, it was a Saturday, I was drinking all day doing yard work and decided to have a little heroin, smoke a little heroin, right? And it caused me to stop breathing because of the alcohol mixed with the heroin. So it wasn't an overdose.
From the dive bar?
No, this is at my house.
Okay, stop breathing from the dive bar. Sorry, I'm just calling.
Yeah. So Troy came in the house, I was blue, and he like threw me in the shower, slapping me, you know, the whole thing. Calls the police. Well, because of that, DCFS got involved. And then once that started, it was just, I couldn't keep it together.
Heroin and drinking, and you nearly died.
Yeah. I woke up, I came to in an ambulance.
Because there's also a fallacy in early recovery. I mean, in when you're using, not a fallacy, it is crazy how you justify, because I justified smoking it. Mm-hmm. Oh, it's like, because I'm not shooting up.
Yeah, then it's okay. Well, and I didn't overdose. It was because my BAC was so high, my blood alcohol level was so high. All it took was just a little bit of an opiate to cause pulmonary.
Okay, so DCFS is now involved,
mm-hmm. and so
and you don't. I'm sure that just everything worked out. So the way the story ended, everything worked out.
Everything was fine. Yeah. And here's the thing. Like this is not a slap to DCFS, but no one said to me, "Hey, you have an illness and you need to treat it." They just said, "Can you pass these drug tests? I need you to show up to these things and pass these drug tests."
So not to interrupt, but heroin. DCFS is involved because you are blue. And you nearly die.
Right.
And then DCFS, I mean, we can just say it's probably because of lack of funding, let's be honest.
Right.
Like that. So there was no real education on you're sick and you need help. It was just like, please pass these tests and you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
And then what the hell happened?
So, I mean, some of it too was that like I was being told if I stayed with my husband, then we'd be counted as right? Because he also.
What is this?
Like as one. Like, so if we separate, then DCFS will look at his progress and my progress as two separate things.
And were you looking at separating at that point?
So no, so I was actually able to maintain some sobriety. He was not. He kept having dirty drug tests.
How did you stop drinking and using heroin?
So heroin, I wasn't physically addicted to it. When that happened, I was just literally recreationally using it, which sounds insane, but it wasn't even every day. It was just like here and there for a little buzz.
It gets its fangs in you in a strange way, and then once it does, it's...
So I didn't have like a physical dependence, but he did, and I didn't know that. So I didn't know why he couldn't stop. He kept testing positive for opiates. You know what I'm saying? Like he was physically dependent, and I didn't know until later. But anyway, so they had advised me that I leave him so that we could have separate journeys, but my original addiction is codependency. I was addicted to that person, and I could not leave him.
How long did it take you to figure that out? How long did it take you to be able to say what you just did?
Oh my God. It was literally, the very last time I went to treatment, so I never talked about him in treatment. I went to treatment 7 times, FYI, throughout the course of my time with Troy. Yeah. 6 of those were for alcohol. I've only been to treatment 1 time for the other stuff. And I had a therapist that was like, have you ever considered that this person is like a drug to you and that you're triggered to? Because I would end up with him, I would leave him and I would end up with him. He was also really abusive. And I didn't know why I would go back. I'd be like, what the hell would happen? And so when it was broken down like it's a drug, like you trigger to it just like you would your drugs or alcohol, I was like, oh, what? Like that. Once it was explained that it was an addiction, I was just like, oh, because I had no idea why I would just keep going back to this person. It was so toxic, you know what I mean? You're
saying so much good shit, not to interrupt, but the codependency as an addiction and recognizing that early, and then also thinking that you could drink, these are all things that...
Yeah. Well, those are all the pieces to the puzzle for me, for my success now, is that I was like,
and it is a puzzle, and it's hard to put together. And
it took a lot of times. I had a lot of trials, a lot of jail.
And it's still ongoing, right? There's still pieces missing for me.
100%. Every day I'm like, why did I do that?
Where's this piece?
Yeah, that's not a good behavior.
Why did I just yell at someone?
What if that just happened? Yeah, no, it's constant, right? And that's the other thing too, is something that, once I well, I don't know, where do you want me to go now?
It doesn't matter,
I lost that child eventually.
You gave it up?
Yeah, I had to I signed away my rights to that child. And
Traumatic.
he was 4 years old at the time. And that's when, and it was horrible.
So 4 and what, you're 36?
Yeah.
Wow.
So, and like that was like, so there was like, you know, like I'll just tell you like this, and thank God for trauma work. So I got to see him one last time after I signed the paperwork at the DCFS office. His adoptive mom, you know, like I'm holding him, and he is like, "Mommy, I want to come home with you. Mommy, I want to come home with you."
Oh
Maybe I'll
God.
cry. You know, when it was time to go, she had to like pry his fingers off of my shoulders, you know, and he was like reaching out. So anyway, that memory caused me to literally dive headfirst into the world of heroin. From that day forward, I was a heroin addict.
Did you use heroin that very day?
I went home and got high, and then I just kept doing it, and then it became physically addicted to it. And you know, Troy and I were maintaining that for a while. We thought we were bougie. We were living in Woods Cross, and we had our heroin delivered to us. Like I'd never been to the block, or you know, I was just, you know, we had someone bring us an 8-ball every day. It was like really, until you can only maintain, right? And you can't do that for very long. And eventually, he went to prison.
Or?
So he went to prison for 9 DUIs. He had 9 DUIs.
Wow.
Yeah. Can you believe that was his first time in prison? He had a lot of money always, so he could pay really high, you know, he paid a lot of money to attorneys to keep from ever having to go. But eventually, like, I don't know, some judge was like, "Are you kidding me? Like, what?" And he's someone that never would say he was an alcoholic, even though, you know,
So he goes to prison.
He goes to prison, which I always, whenever he'd go to jail, it would be like my escape from him, because I didn't know how to get away from it. But
And it would be okay with the codependency because there was no choice in the matter.
Right.
And so then there was some liberation.
You're out of here, yeah. But then pretty quickly after that, I couldn't pay the rent because I couldn't function. You know, he's much higher functioning. I go straight derelict when I start using drugs. Like I can barely shower. I can't, you know what I mean? I'm not good at it.
The drugs are important. It's
They're
a priority.
Exactly. So I pawned everything I owned, you know, including my grandmother's 100, you know, whatever-year-old wedding ring, which, you know, and I eventually couldn't pay the bills, and I couldn't, you know, and I had nowhere to go, and so I became homeless.
So, and remind me where that, and that's you lived in what house, what's the city?
I was in Woods Cross.
Okay, so you're in Woods Cross. How is it that you end up, like when you're first homeless, your first night homeless?
I got on the front runner with all my stuff,
Jesus.
What little I had, and I just rode it back and forth. I didn't know what to do, and it was weird.
So you're just riding the train?
Yeah, but I like, this is like some weird shit. This guy walks onto the train who was the coke dealer who was at that bar all the time, right?
Oh, the dive bar.
But he's now not good. Like because he used to be like kind of like, you know, like
because he
had a
invented
nice
the dive
car
bar.
or whatever. No, now he's like he weighs like 50 pounds, and he's got a bike, and he's all, you know, he got into meth is what happened. I barely recognize him, and he's like, "What are you doing?" I told him, he's like, "Well, I got a place, you can come stay." So there it was.
Isn't it so amazing? So like, there's like, when you think of community, when you think of in recovery, they talk about like healthy people will come together and it will speak in ways that you cannot explain.
Yeah.
The fact that you run into that guy in the train, you cannot explain it, but it's for the other reason. It's
Right.
for the dark shit.
Right.
So he takes you where?
To just some apartment. Like I feel he was squatting now that in retrospect, because there's no furniture in it. Like he was weird when he was going in. You
It's
know
like,
what I mean?
yeah, I just,
yeah, but it was a place to stay. Like I didn't give a shit. And at that point, I'd never tried meth, and I always thought like I'll never do meth. Like those people are out of control.
Just heroin.
But you know, when in Rome,
you're literally homeless. I'm joking.
well, and I wasn't, and so and I forgot to say this, when I became homeless, I had not used heroin for like 30 days. So I was actually sober from heroin, but I just had nowhere to go. And so when he offered me meth, I was like, no, but then it was like, when in Rome, at least it's not heroin. I really did. I thought somehow I was
When
winning.
in Rome, at least it's not heroin. I'm pretty sure that's what they said in Rome.
I think
I think that is Plato.
And
Plato.
also in my mind, it was harm reduction. Like, meth, at least it's not heroin.
It's meth. I used meth to get off heroin. I did, and then I used alcohol to get off meth.
But let me just tell you something. If anything was going to change the game, it was methamphetamine. That's when I decided I could steal
And how old are-
cars
wait, though, how-
and write bad checks and steal from people and run.
So much motivation for that. It's such a dark moment. It's like, I can now write bad checks and steal cars. And
I've never done any of that stuff.
So then how long until you're like you do some meth, and I'm assuming you started out smoking it.
I was smoking it, yeah. Well, drugs I was smoking at this time.
And the whole time before you became homeless, was it ID heroin? Were you shooting up?
I had just started using IV heroin.
Okay.
Right before that happened.
Okay, and so so you're at that apartment, you're squatting in an apartment.
Yeah.
And then
Tweaker camp.
when did the idea come to be in business and be self-sufficient?
Oh,
No, how long were you? No, really.
the best part. No,
like the best part.
it's the best part. No, so that was a weird one because it was like, so I was in that like meth shit, whatever, and then I like went to jail, and my mom was like, you can come stay here, right? And
What'd you go to jail for that time?
I don't
Just
know. I've been so many
meth
times.
and being on meth and
Just being on
homeless.
meth and like probably Walmart.
We
like,
charge you with meth.
probably retail theft or something. I don't know. It's always something on meth. But in your mind, you're being targeted for sure. But anyway, so but you look wild, like, you know, like you're gnawing your own ear off, like
Yeah,
or trying
a
to.
family when you're.
Yeah,
all the same.
everyone's wild, and so you're very noticeable when you're on meth, and people are automatically assuming
And you
you're
feel like everyone's watching you,
up
but
to
it's
no
because
good.
you're so
They
noticeable.
are watching you.
Yeah, because you're.
They're like, that lady's
tweaking
gonna steal
out.
stuff. So anyway, so I go to jail. I get done with. So then my mind's clear. Okay, I'll go with my mom, and that doesn't work because we don't get along. We do now, and that's been a lot
Years.
of work.
Yeah.
Where because I was blamed her for everything. Just kind of. So personal work has changed that relationship for sure. But yeah, so I go to her house, and it's like she expects certain things out of me, right? Which that makes sense, right? And I'm like not able, so it didn't work out. Well, she like puts me up in a hotel. And I'm at this hotel, and I'm dope sick, and I'm in the lobby, and this girl is in the lobby, and she just like keeps looking at me. She walks over to me, and she's like, "Are you dope sick?" And I was just like, and this was like in Clearfield. This wasn't like a shitty. This was like a Comfort Inn in
Another
Clearfield.
strange, dark coincidence,
Yeah,
like just some random.
Comfort Inn in Clearfield.
Like I don't
It's
think
not
that's ever
downtown.
happened to Neil.
No.
Like
She came up to me and she said, "Are you dope sick?" And I was like, "What?" And she's like, I have something that can help you. So she invites me back to her room. She doesn't have any heroin, but she has meth, which I was just like, how's that gonna help you?
it's everywhere.
So I do that thinking it's gonna help, doesn't help, just FYI. But anyway, but then she's like, well, listen, she's like, if you need heroin, she's like, I know a really easy way to get it. She's like, I do body rubs for money. And I was like, what's that? And she's like, I just, da, 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 da. So basically you do a massage with a happy ending. And I was like, okay, well, I don't know how to do that. And I'm like, dying.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, I have a guy coming here in 20 minutes if you want to watch me and see how I do it. She's like, I'll get you some black. That's the word for heroin on the street. I'll get you some black so you can feel better. And then.
So are you in the room
She
when
recruited me.
Wow.
Yeah, she recruited me, and eventually what happened is she recruited me and then started like taking my money.
Was she
and made me like dependent on her, like where she would get all the.
And
You know
there's
what I mean? It's her room, it's her, because she has ID, she has things that I don't have. So I can't like procure a room on my own, so I have to be, she kind of like made it so that I was dependent on her. And then finally one day I was just like, well, fuck you, I'm over this. So
I'm going out on my own.
I ventured out. So at that time, Troy got out of prison and he found out what I was doing and he was fine with it. He's like, all right, cool, awesome. This is a really easy way to make money. So he would come in the room, like the customer would come in.
So wait, your husband's now out of prison.
Yeah.
And he's fine with you doing this.
Oh, it's buying his drugs.
So now you're the provider.
Yeah, and so listen, this is a weird twist. That whole move is exactly what freed me from Troy, because I suddenly realized I had independence and I didn't need him anymore. He was kind of an annoyance to me because up until then.
And he's taking your money.
No, up until then, he owned the cars, he owned the house, he had the money. You know what I mean? I was just the person that I worked and stuff, but like it was still like all Troy took care of me. And so this was like a situation where I was like suddenly like, wait a fucking minute, like you're kind of bugging me. Like I would think of him as like a little like a kid hanging on your leg that like, and you're like, like get your own hustle. Like he'd never done the streets before. I was mastering it at the time. So anyway, but so for a little while, that went on for like a few months. He was my protection though. So because how I set it up, I was like, okay, this is what you're gonna do. The customer comes in, they give me the money, you come to the door, I hand you the money, so they see you and they know that you're aware that they're in the room so that
And
they
did
won't,
you learn this
so they
from
won't
her,
hurt
or
me.
did you
No,
figure that out?
No, I just came up with that on my own. Before I had Troy there, when I was by myself, I would pretend like I was calling my bodyguard when there really was no one.
So scary.
Just because I didn't want, anyone to because you hear stories, girls that don't, they get, one girl got burned, cigarettes, they're just like all kinds of like really horrible things that can happen. But you don't care it's like, when you're addicted to drugs, it's like you need oxygen, right? You're going to do whatever you can to get a breath, right? They're not going to, so it becomes air, right? And so, yeah, and Troy was involved with that for a few months, and then he went to prison again, and I was like, hallelujah. I was so excited. I was with him when you were on the front runner, and he got arrested and went back to prison because he was he was wanted or whatever. And so from then, I just had my own business. I had ads on Backpage. I had fake names. I had regulars. And it became more than just body rubs, of course, because it always does. It starts there, we're like, well, I'll never do anything more than a hand job, but then, until someone offers you more money, and you're just like, oh, okay. But sex work was the thing that got me independence, which is weird. That's why I can understand, some of those people don't understand, those women who are in the streets, trauma controlled, gang controlled, drug controlled. But really, when you don't have a pimp and you're just doing it on your own, I always had a place to stay. I always had drugs.
How did you avoid not having somebody come in and completely exploit you and take advantage? And because it would seem like that would be.
I know now. Now I know so much more about what could have happened, and I'm lucky that it didn't. Honestly.
How many years were you doing that?
Let's see, just 2 maybe.
2 years.
Yeah, I was really from heroin to sobriety was 6 years. So I did all of that in 6 years.
And wow.
So I just took it to the ground really fast. I don't know what that was about. And I do always believe that I always think about if I would have gotten involved in drugs when I was younger, then this would have happened anyway. Just would have happened when I was younger.
Now, have you,
I don't know.
At 4 years, in your 4 years, right? Of course you are, your 4 years. Is there still continued, and we're going to get to the solution, but is there still continued revelations? Because you just said, I don't know what that's about. Is there still, we mentioned codependency. Yeah,
I do know what it's about.
Okay, so what is it? What was it?
Trauma. I feel like for me, it was trauma. It was a lot of trauma. The stuff in the early days, it all stemmed from codependency began in my childhood because of things in my childhood.
Well, in the DCFS, when you were splitting from, that is a massive traumatic event.
I chose Troy over my son, really. And drugs.
Well, you chose heroin.
I chose heroin, but even before the heroin, I chose Troy because I was staying sober. That probably wouldn't have lasted, honestly, because I had no treatment. I'd never had therapy. I'd never had, I'd been to treatment, but it was more just a distance from the substance. I was never getting treatment for, and with Troy, he's a very abusive, mentally, physically, well, sometimes physically, cheated on me a lot, was really gaslighted me, made me think I was out of my mind. So of course I turned to drugs and alcohol, to cope with that.
So what was, I know there's jail a couple times, but what was the thing? Is there something that you can look back to? You're on the streets and you're doing what you're doing. And I've seen the pictures. We should share some with you, Neil. You could put them up.
They look really awesome.
It is amazing though, the transformation. So was it a gradual thing that led to treatment, or was there something significant, or was it accumulation of just a mass amount of horrific
You're
things?
talking about the last time I went when
when you finally when this last time, when you finally got it.
So, I think, I'd been
what was the motivation?
I was in jail. I'd been to jail 100 times, right? I literally had a spiritual experience in jail, coupled with, I have an Eskimo who was my little brother, Brett, who got sober 3 years. I call him my Eskimo because he introduced me to a 12-step program, which up until then, I was unwilling to try anything with spirituality, but I was so beat down. And I had this cellmate in jail with me who, she was she was old, and she looked like someone's cute little grandma, and she was always reading a Bible or the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous or positive literature. And she'd been there 9 months, and Salt Lake County Jail is the most hateful place I've ever been. So I don't know how you can be in a good mood, but this woman was always in a good mood. And I was having all this trouble with, I got court and this, and then I was complaining. And she said, why don't you pray about it? And I literally turned around and I looked at her and I said, oh, okay. Why don't I write a letter to Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy and we'll all get together with the Easter Bunny? And, and her face was just, because she was obviously a very firm believer, and her face was just like, oh. And then she said, well, if it's not real, then what's it going to hurt? And I suddenly was like, boom, like she's right.
Not real,
like,
what's it going to hurt?
True. So I was like, okay, so I decided to pray. Like I started praying every day in my little jail cell, whatever that looked like. And I started reading the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I didn't understand it. In my mind, I'd already read that. Which
Isn't that interesting? I was like,
I'm like, oh, I know that shit.
Yes.
I've been to all those meetings. I know everything.
I know it, yeah.
I knew nothing, okay? And I'm reading, and there's a Bill's story, right? There's a story, one of the founders, he's talking about, and I had reading some of this, I had this true experience where I felt this overwhelming warmth, right? And I started crying, tears of joy. And I hadn't cried in 100 years, right? I mean, it was just I'd been so hardened by the lifestyle I was living. And I was even just what's happening? And it was tears of joy though. It was what in the fuck? And I just suddenly was just okay, this is where I need to go. This is what I need to do. And then a couple days later, my little brother wanted to talk to me. And he's such a stubborn person that when I found out he was doing a 12-step program, I'm like, so wait, you have a sponsor and you do what they say? and he kept saying all these little things that we now know are just little slogans and cliches.
Yeah,
he's like, I just do the next right thing. I just do it. And I'm just shut. And at first it was kind of aggravating. I was like, that's too simple. But
they're still kind of aggravating, but they're true.
But they're true.
But they're true.
And so, and he's still doing really well, and he was also a heroin addict. But yeah, so it was that. It was I just had a few things happen that where I was okay, I need to do something different.
What would you say to an atheist though? Not even an agnostic, because I work with a lot of people, and I'm 9.5 years into this. I've heard a lot of different stories. And one thing I've noticed with people that struggle with that kind of a story,
they're okay, whatever.
They'll dismiss it immediately, but it resonates with me because to me, I've had a similar experience. Yeah. And, so what do you say to someone that has, because you were that person.
I know.
So
I was instantly.
Would you recommend just continuing to, I love what did she say? What did she say?
She said, if it's not real, then what will it hurt? Which is true. And so then I really approached it from okay, well, at least at the very least, I'm putting my intentions out there. I'm trying to figure something out. It's not about I still don't have I don't define whatever that connection is. I don't. To me, it's not I was raised with the guy with the white beard and a cloud. That's not it. To me, I don't have, it doesn't even
No, there's way more.
It's to me, it's more collective, I guess. And there's a lot of neuroscience that kind of backs this, that our brains are absolutely stimulated, activated in certain ways when we are having those experiences. You know what I mean? I think we saw that in the pandemic, people, when they were isolated from one another, look at mental health is not awesome. And so spirituality is not to me about God or religion, or it's not that. It's not that. It's connection with other human beings and animals, and you know what I mean. It's and I'm not woo by any means.
No.
In fact, I used to think that was woo.
But it's a very much that's an intense, very real experience. You said warmth. You felt so I think the biggest thing that you did in that moment in jail, which you have to do, is, and you mentioned it before, I was unwilling. You became willing for the first time. To do whatever. And then whatever that is, the connection, the whatever, responded. And you knew. And so then, how long were you in jail that time?
I think 45 days.
And then you went to treatment again.
So I was court ordered to, it was an outpatient. It was the first time I'd ever done, I'd always done 30-day residentials, right? I'd done 6 of them prior.
And no aftercare, I'm assuming.
Never PHP, IOP, sober living. Never done that. And it was suggested to me that so I didn't need residential because I just did 45 days in Salt Lake County Jail, which, they were okay, well, we'll just order you too. And then I originally didn't do sober living. I was living with my mom, which she's a drinker. She's, you know what I mean? It's not it's her fault. I just couldn't be around it. And I realized it. And so I had 70 days sober, but I had started going to 12-step meetings every day. Twice a day.
How are you getting there?
Got a sponsor.
Did you have a vehicle?
No, my parents took me. They were just
That's so awesome.
Yeah. And so, and this was like, they live in a place where there's not like a lot of public transportation, so I kind of needed someone to take me. And then I made friends in the 12-step meetings and had people
Community.
help me. Yeah,
Go
and
figure.
one of the friends happened to live in a sober living in Kaysville when I drank again. I drank it like 70 days sober.
Oh, so you did.
But I had a connection with a sponsor in a 12-step group.
There it is.
Called the sponsor. Sponsor said, you need to call your probation officer, which I'd never done that before.
Honesty.
And I was on zero tolerance. Like I was going to go to prison if I didn't do this probation. And I called him and he said, I'm so glad you told me. He's like, this is exactly what I need from people. I'm willing to work with you. I understand you're an alcoholic. I understand you. But the honesty is what I need. And so he gave me another chance. And then my friend, the guy that I'd met in 12-step recovery, lived at this sober living and was like, you should come here. And that's where I met Daniel Arrington. And the therapist that taught me about my codependency and the narcissistic abuse syndrome stuff, you know what I mean? And also that Troy wasn't the only victim in that relationship. I was a terrible partner as well, which I did not ever want to admit.
Those are the hardest things, Todd, like the parts about, it's awesome.
Oh, I could be the victim all day. Oh, he's a horrible man.
And then it's like, oh, but
Well, it was that therapist that said to me, because he always said I was bad for him. And Doug, he turned to me and he said, aren't you? Weren't you? And I was just like, what? No. And so, yes, getting that out of that victim stance where I could finally own my part.
And there's
like,
freedom in that. As hard
100%.
as that is, like, I've told you this story before, but I had someone tell me that as soon as you say you stop, that you lost those things, and you say, I gave those things up.
Yeah,
you'll begin to get better. And I did. I was like at 7 months sober, I stopped saying like, oh, I lost this, I lost my ex, I lost these things.
Yeah.
And I didn't. I gave those things up.
Yeah.
But there's power
Yes.
in that honesty, but it's hard to get to.
It's very much like, and humility, right? Like when you can own, like when I said that about my mom, I had a troubled relationship with my mom, not because of my mom, but because of me. And once I could own that like, oh my God, like you have total control over where this goes.
What is the difference in when you're working with someone either here at Brighton or as a sponsee? Is the difference just the ones that will not do that? Is it because I'm sure it's a lot of different things, but.
I mean, obviously, and this is like so basic, but it really is true. The honesty, open-mindedness, willingness, the how of it was, to me, is the thing that was different this time. That was essential.
It's the foundation. How do we do it?
Honesty, I needed to be honest, which I wasn't able to
will.
be honest. That's the truth. Like I was just a liar. And everything that came out of my mouth
That's
was
the hardest part.
True.
And in early recovery that first year, that is the hardest part because I spent 20 years lying. I was such a fucking liar.
Oh my God.
And so it was so amazing, like when you're trying to be honest, to catch yourself, even in recovery. I'm doing really well, right? I'm doing outpatient, I'm doing all these things. But I would find myself randomly, somebody would ask me something.
Just lie.
Full on lie. For no reason. And what I started getting in the habit of doing is saying, I just lie. I would literally say that to him.
Oh my God.
That's not true. That's not, and it takes, you can't be full of shit and a liar, and in your case on the streets, and doing everything, hustling. You couldn't even operate under your own name.
Right.
And that's what I'm talking about with level, like your whole life has lived in deceit and twisting and lies. And for me, it did too, to justify how sick I was. But I think that honesty, like you have to catch yourself. And it's hard if you're having a conversation with someone and you're starting to be, for no reason.
Oh, no. You're like, oh, that's...
But I had to be, because I was such a liar, my tendency was to just make stuff up.
That's why you gotta fess up when you mess up.
And I think it took me, I started working on it probably like 3 months in recovery or 4 months, but I don't think I was legitimately an honest person, like fully, until probably year like 2.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, I think too. I think I had a like.
The lies would still creep in. They would, and I just, the difference was I owned it.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I don't know why that's not true. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
I'd be saying something to somebody, that's not true.
Yeah. No, like one of the most memorable ones that happened to me. So my son, he was a teenager at the time, and we're hanging out, and I'm telling him this story about this thing that happened at this meeting, right? Where a cop showed up to like get some drunk guy out of the parking lot, but then ended up like kind of standing around for the meeting. Yeah. It was a cool story, right? Like cool things happen. So I'm telling him this whole story, and I'm just like, I'm really like juicing it up, like it's really great, super powerful, really. And then I get all the way to the end of it, and I'm like, I wasn't there. I don't know why I said I was there. And my son was just like, And he's like, bro, because he calls me bro, which is funny. He's like, bro, I would have no way of fact checking that. Like that's
Like,
you didn't have to tell me. You know what I mean? He's like, oh, like he's like, that's right. He's like, that shows. He like in that moment knew that like that was change because it wasn't just, oh, I'm correcting a lie that was like damaging to someone. This was a lie that would never hurt him, but it will hurt me. Is the thing that I was now learning. Like, oh, and it's practice too. If I tell myself with the little, you know, because those little ones, we want to be like, oh, it's a white lie, it's a white lie. Well, pretty soon that becomes like.
Well, and it's a
pattern.
slippery as hell slope with it. Like you are regressing. We're going to continue to progress, to get better. Those little things.
I practiced it most when I started working with you because I was still like 2 years sober, you know, like still like things. And you would be like, why didn't you walk me through why you didn't blah, blah, blah.
Walk me through why you did.
And my knee jerk inside my body wanted to be like, oh, because, or I didn't see that, or I don't, you know, some story, like some lie. But instead I'd be like, I don't know why. I forgot, or, you know, so it was good practice to like, because a lot of why I would lie, especially with men, would be this fear response of like, oh, I'm gonna be in trouble if I tell you the truth.
Man trauma.
Lots
of man trauma.
But you know what though? I think about those men were traumatized themselves, so.
Well, that's
probably.
I'm sure that, I mean, I don't know, a lot of things.
Josh didn't know what to say. He's like, wait a minute, you just found compassion for your John,
for
the Johns of the world.
Why not? Like talk about it. You said, speaking of compassion, you said something to me that has resonated forever. You called, you know, you've done a lot of work on your sex work, and you called it voluntary rape. And the fact that you could go through so much trauma and now 4 years later be sitting in a place like this talking about your story and find compassion, it just shows this evolution. We're talking about like honesty and like you found compassion. That's what more if you want to get real, like whether you're a Christian or you're a Buddhist, like that, finding compassion, if anybody, is a beautiful thing and it's freeing.
It's necessary for me.
Because of resentments.
Yeah,
you hold on to some resentment, then it's gonna hustle you down.
Well, and it will only kill me, right? It doesn't, like having resentment against those people, you know what I mean? It doesn't.
You mentioned working with me, and I have to say, and so now it will be forever recorded. Like you've said to me a lot about how much I've helped you, but you have helped me so much. Like to the way that you bought into all this and embraced like something, because I'm not always the best leader, but you really, really embraced that, and it's been so fun.
It has been
and
fun.
It's been amazing 2 years, and now you are a leader, just like I said you were.
I'm working on it.
Heather had no idea that she was a leader.
Yeah, the first time you ever said that to me, I was like, what?
I recognized that early just because she has this natural ability and energy. You got
a leader.
Well,
I mean, I was a supervisor at like Jamba Juice once. I used to like a shift lead, maybe not even a supervisor.
I'll never forget when the first conversation I had with you on the phone. You were amazing. Like I think anybody who's been, if you've been listening to this podcast, like your excitement for recovery, you were doing Recovery Vibe. And you were so passionate and just energy through the phone. I had to meet you. And when I brought you in, I knew. But tell us a little bit about, so how did you get involved with, like, how did you remain sober for those first like couple years, and then what you're doing now?
So, and I kind of just shared this with some of I ran a group just barely, and it was some of the the clients that sometimes in early recovery, like, it's okay to be like really busy, you know, like doing a lot of recovery stuff, you know, and then you'll find balance. Because I needed it. I couldn't be alone in my head with my thoughts, you know, so I maybe went a little too far. I was like a GSR, General Service Representative for a 12-step group. I was sponsoring like way too many people.
At 2 years.
Yeah. I started a nonprofit with my best friend, Austin. He's a dancer. So we started a nonprofit that teaches dance, specifically basic hip hop to treatment centers. We were taking, so I was teaching dance at five different nights, five nights a week at different treatment centers. That had just stopped because of COVID, like had just hit, so we weren't able to take it in when I met you. But we were also like doing sober raves and sober,
you were doing like
fun and recovery stuff.
Parties.
Yeah, like exactly, like just any kind of fun and recovery stuff that we could, arrange. And then I was also doing outreach with an organization called Soap to Hope, which does outreach to sex trafficked, sex exploited, sex workers.
How did you get plugged into that?
I know the girl. In fact, her name's January, and she was at the first treatment center. She was a life tech or like a support staff at the first treatment center I ever went to. And
so
I fast forward, I meet her, I see her, she's in a meeting, and she's openly talking about being a sex worker, which was something I was never going to talk about. And it enabled me to this is okay. So I owe that to her, you know what I mean? That she's very open about her experience. And so she started this Soap to Hope. So I was doing outreach. That's like, they just hand out hygiene to these women, and like let them know they're not forgotten and they matter. Yeah. So it's called Soap to Hope because they give them hygiene and clothes and needle exchange, stuff like that. But, so I was doing all of that when Josh interviewed me, going to a lot of meetings, 12-step meetings, being involved in the community, going to different recovery events.
There's one commonality with all this, and that's a willingness to engage in community.
Yeah. Oh, I wouldn't have been able to, because in the past I'd go to like AA or NA or C, whatever, one of the A's, and I would just go to the meeting and then leave.
Yeah.
I never did the let's go do some fellowshipping. Let's go.
But it's fun, right? And that's so hard.
Yeah.
Because how do we have fun? Like, we've been so sick.
Yeah.
How do we have fun?
Yeah.
What do we do?
Yeah, so I was taught how to have fun by people who had more time. That was another thing that I did. I made sure I latched onto one of the therapists at the place I went said something, and this is like, you've heard this a million times, but it really stuck with me, was that you are the sum of the 5 people that you surround yourself with. Wow. So I was like very hyper aware of like who I was allowing, because I used to always, that's another thing, is I used to want to go hang out with the old friends and the old places and my codependency, like, let me save them, I'm going to save them, and then I'd end up with them. So this time I decided I'm going to put some powerhouses on my team, and I'm not going to waste my time.
I love that. I'm going to put powerhouses on my team.
Juggernauts is what I call them.
Yeah, my starting 5.
Yeah, we're juggernauts of recovery.
I'm not going to have any.
So I did, and it's not that I because I do have that tendency because of the codependency and whatever. Ever since I was a little kid, I gave my shoes away to a kid that didn't have shoes, at school, and get in trouble for that. So I had the tendency to be like, let me save all of you. So I had to let that go and just, go with people that had more time than me, had what I wanted, you know what I mean? Where people I could learn from. And so I'm still active in 12-step recovery. I do, 3 meetings a week. I sponsor people in that program. I do therapy because I still have trauma.
And what do you do here now?
And I work in treatment. Now, I always love to tell people that treatment is not your recovery. Don't make it your recovery. There's a lot of things that go into recovery. Spirituality being my most primary, connection with other people. But I've always wanted to help people, but it was always in an unhealthy way. And now I get to help people in a healthy way. When I'm talking to the clients here and connecting with them and giving them a solution, and I can see that they're it never occurred. Because I didn't know until I knew, right? I had to have somebody explain things to me that now are just automatic. But I don't know. I really also recovery has brought me self-love, self-esteem. The child that I gave up to DCFS at 6 years from the day that last time I saw him, I got to see him again. When I made amends to his mom is my sister-in-law. So my brother and sister-in-law adopted him, and they would never let me see him, and I resented them for that. But I'm really grateful to them now because I'd get 60.
Resentments become gratitude.
Right. I called her and thanked her, and she cried. She was just like, "What in the world is this?" Because I always felt a victim to that, and why wouldn't they let me see him? I only used drugs because I couldn't see him, which is not true. And he was saved from all of that. My older kids got to see mom every 60 days, I'm back, and they're just oh. So they didn't want anything to do with me. But now like my daughter just FaceTimed me, my 24-year-old daughter, and she now, oh, and I also belong to like FTR, Fit to Recover, like a recovery gym. And she now goes to that gym.
When you've been an amazing support and stability to Daphne and Owen, your kids.
Yeah,
as
my
adults.
son Owen, he was very traumatized by both of his parents, and I've been able to help him walk through a lot of that, like help him give him resources.
And did that help happen instantly?
No. And really, Josh Hall helped me through a lot of it, because I'm like calling him, like, I don't know what to do. He's like punching the wall, and he doesn't have that anger anymore, and he's doing well. And but it was really hard, but then I remembered I was like, this is what you asked for. You prayed to have your kids back. You didn't say specifically, I want my kids back in really great condition and like, as healthy as. So I was like, okay, this is it. This is how I'm going to be a mom to him. I missed out on these years. Can't live in that regret. Can't live in that past. That's, gone. But I can, those living amends, as they call it, right? I can now live a life that,
So how old is the kid that DCFS took?
He's 11, and he just came. So I have a new partner. I live with him, and he has 2 kids, and his son is just turned 11, and he had a birthday party last Saturday, and Wilson was there.
So you get to see him?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he had a sleepover at my house. Like, he's friends with my boyfriends. So I met Heather. He knows who I am. Like, he knows I'm biologically his mom, and he knows kind of the story. Like, I don't think he'll probably want to know more of it when he's a little older. And I'm just taking that as slow. You can show him this podcast. Yeah. I'm like, hey, you're 14. You can handle it. So yeah, but I didn't. So forever and ever, I was like, oh, I need to have him back. I need to have, and now I don't. He has a home. He has parents. He has a stable, you know what I mean? He's good at school. He's in sports. He's got a really balanced, adjusted life. And so I have no reason to be like, I need to get in there. It'll happen however it's supposed to happen, and it's. I'm not worried about it.
With so much work and effort and therapy and a place like, here and support, like, you're proof that it can work and does work.
Yeah.
And it's such an asset to the people who are here.
Well, and it makes me, I really do appreciate this organization, because I feel like I've worked in treatment before other places, and I felt like it was a churn them in, churn them out, bed filling. I didn't feel like the patients or clients were getting the care they needed. And I know there's a lot of reasons for that, especially some of the places I've worked, but I do respect here, there's like a level of ethics and like individual attention that I can get behind.
Well, and it's built with people like you. And I think, from the very top to all the way through, it's built with people who care and believe in it and are either engaged in it or are products of it. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I don't know, you're remarkable.
Thanks, Josh Hall.
Yeah, we've talked about a lot of things. We've talked about honesty, open-mindedness, willingness, spiritual component. So,
there's 2 things that were the most impactful for me. And it was also like some probably old timers saying this. One of them is, is that, be willing to do, if you want recovery, you have to be willing to do whatever it takes. And so if someone suggests to you, hey, I think you need to look at yourself in the mirror and say, I love you, which is cringy when you're new, even it's hard, it's really hard, but you just do it. Or like writing out affirmations. So it doesn't matter. Someone tells you to write a gratitude list. It doesn't sound like that's going to do anything for you. Do it anyway, because it's got to be better than what you're doing, right? And the other thing, which we hear this all the time, is if you want self-esteem, do esteemable acts. Ooh. And we're so selfish and self-centered when we're in our substance use, and we're victims to everything, and we're not thinking about others. Like for me, people were commodity. Like, what can you do for me? What can I get from you? How are you going to benefit me? And so it was very wild for me to be like, oh, what can I do for you? How can I help you? What can I, and so
service.
Mm-hmm, being of service has been a game changer for my recovery and continues to be. And when I don't want to do it, sometimes I'll be like, it's Sunday, it's like my day off, I don't want to go meet this sponsee. And then every time I do it anyway, because that's what I was taught. You just do it anyway. If it's convenient, it's not service probably, but and so I go and I meet with them, and then I leave that meeting feeling, oh my God, like I just helped that person, and like I feel so much better, So I never leave doing something for another person and think, God, I wish I hadn't done that. That never. So yeah, that's what has built my self-esteem.
It's amazing. Thank you for watching. Heather, thank you for being here. Appreciate
Thanks
it so
for having
much.
me.
You can find more of our episodes on BrightonRecoveryCenter.com and listen to our podcast wherever you find your podcasts, Spotify, iTunes, all the places. Appreciate you. Till next time.